Welcome to the Backyard Professor Chess videos. I'm up here on Willow Creek, here above Taylor Mountain. It's kind of a beautiful little spot. I like to come up here and go camping a lot. We're going to chessercise some more, exploring the board, exploring the position, looking at our options. Let's take a look at this. We can see the imbalances. Both have rooks. Both have queens. There's a bishop-knight difference in the imbalance, right? The kings were obviously in the middle game. The king is more centralized in the black. He's got a great fortress here. White seems to be trying to attack him. The queen is coming down hard on the king here right now from black, right? The knight is centrally posted well in an outpost, but that outpost can be threatened, except it's protected by the queen, right? Kind of nice to see. You can't pick off a target because the queen's got the target covered. The rook is doing a good defensive job here of keeping that rook out. This rook is on an open file, but so is this rook coming down toward the king here. So this is a tense game. This is a dynamic position. There are pros and cons and pluses and negatives on both sides of this board, right? We've got good access for aisles across. We have open files, etc. What do you do if you're black? What are you wanting to do? Well, it looks like there's a really good attack on the king. He's out here in the wide open, isn't he? What do you do if you're white? Well, the king is very protected behind his fortress, and he's got some serious potential to come and do some damage. Black's got that bishop right there. That queen can pop down here, and white's going to lose his queen. Well, it happens to be white's move here. He sees all this tenseness. He realizes this kind of a board needs action now. It's not going to help him to push a pawn. That pawn does nothing for him. Hopefully you can see that. That pawn is a complete waste of move as far as that goes. Perhaps he can come over here and get rid of the tension between the queens and try to get the queens off the board. But then you've got to deal with the rooks on the open files and this bishop coming down toward the king too, right? So that's an option. Get the queens off the board. But when you analyze this a little closer, you see an interesting situation I want to show you. The king here has some pieces around him, right? The black king. We can see this knight has blocked off this square for the king to run to. We can see that the rook has a really possible, actually his rook and pawn are stopping the king from going to there, his pawn here and here and here, his bishop. He's only got 1, 2 flight squares, right? So by exploring the area, the territory around the king, we see that if we could find a way to attack those 2 squares, we can checkmate this king, can't we? Well, we've examined the board for possible options, and it seems like everyone's covered. Do you see a move that you can checkmate that black king? It's important that you play dynamic, because you're in trouble as white. By now, I'm sure you've all seen the move. If not, let me show it to you. What's wrong with putting the queen on a4 and going checkmate? This is kind of a fun one-move puzzle that I got out of Laszlo Polgar's huge, thick black book on chess combinations and puzzles. By chessercising, by looking at all of the board, by seeing the imbalances and the differences, by understanding the dynamics of the board, we can find a move that solves our problems, can't we? I've got another one I want to show you. Here in this one, we have another very tense dynamic situation. When we observe the imbalances, we recognize immediately that this knight on this outpost is very well placed. If you're playing black, that knight on the outpost is an important point. But this bishop is even more problematic. Obviously, this bishop is preventing black from castling, right? He is right in the craw of black at this point. Black is very disturbed at how lousy he has played this game, right? He has an option of putting the knight to here and doing a great fork on the queen and the rook, right? He has an option here of chasing the knight away. Now, if he chases this knight away, then he can get rid of that stupid bishop, except for one problem. This rook's on the open file and it's guarding that bishop. It doesn't seem to me like black has a lot of options for without losing some material here, right? He's kind of in a hard way. He's got a bishop out, but it doesn't do anything to address these issues. It's going to be impossible to pull a rook here. You're going to lose a rook. You don't want to go down the exchange if you can at all help it. You can't quite get to him with the knight. This is a tough situation. You've got a weak pawn down here, but this is the issue up here, and with the open file, and with the queen coming to here, his queen has a great outpost there that is potential serious checkmate material, right? He also has a very fun option. White, if you're white, you can come back here and you've got a free rook and you're putting the king in check. Isn't that cool? That's a great move because you got to move the king or else pull your bishop back to here, which might be an option because you can switch that cotton-picking knight that's doing so much damage in positional control, right? So that's an option here. But if you're white, you want to pay attention to the dynamics of this position. And yes, this is a good move, and it will net you a rook, for sure. But when you look at all your pieces, you've got a queen to come up to here. That's a potential, except the rook's covering it. But it's a potential bother for the king. What move can you find that puts the king in checkmate? I've shown you quite a few options. You could take that pawn and have a great fork on the king and the rook, but you just simply lose your knight. Do you see a potential move here that is a checkmate? When we explore the dynamics of the board, when we understand where the pieces are, what they want to do, etc., you begin to see fun things. This is another one of those puzzles that makes you want to understand the chessboard in order to make the proper move. This is why we want to learn how to chessercise the board. Check out the imbalances. The imbalances here is white has a superior development. He certainly has the central thrust, and he also has the open file, and he's using them to serious effect. In fact, because of this position dynamic for white, he has the game won, if you can find the right move. The move is simple. Knight to f6. What this does is it puts the king in check. We know that the bishop is guarded, and he has taken away the two flight squares away from the king. So what we have to do in this position is we recognize the king can't run, so all we have to do at this point is put him safely in check, and it'll be checkmate. And that's the move. I've got another one I want to show you. These are fun, aren't they? Kind of get you looking at the board and all the pieces carefully. That's the essence of Chessercising. This is why you want to know how to read the board, isn't it? Yeah, helps us not overlook checkmates. We had a great move here where we can be up the exchange, but the game goes on. There's a better move once you realize that knight on an outpost, he properly posted it on an outpost. You can see again the serious effect and consequences of this when that knight can actually deliver the checkmate. Very important to develop like this. And again, to keep to our themes of Chessercising the chessboard, examining it for imbalances, examining it for weaknesses, examining the position so that we know what right piece to move, right? This is critical to do in games. If you don't know what the board's telling you, you won't know what piece to play. Again, we have a game. Fairly open board, isn't it? There's not a lot of pawns cluttering the center here. The material looks like it's even. Same number of pawns. Both kings, of course. Without the kings, you can't play the game. Duh. Both rooks. 2 bishops. Each side has a bishop. What's the dynamic here? What is the imbalance? Well, you discover the open file. If he's not careful with this rook, there's a potential back checkmate. This other rook hasn't developed. White has developed both his rooks, and he has them on a very, very powerful central open file, right? The bishops are placed about evenly. He has more space on the king side with his pawn push, so he's got more space here. The queen side is fairly safe for white. There is a pawn here that's behind. It can catch up, however, right? There's a weakness here. There's a weak pawn here. The king's cover has been shattered. When we examine this kind of a board, we see something interesting. The bishop is behind the rook, pointing toward the king. That means this rook moves, the king is going to be in check. Right? So your first inclination is, look, I have doubled rooks. I have the open file, and I've got a chance to check this king plus exchange some rooks. That's a great move. Check to the king. The king has to move, then you can take a rook, and the other rook has to go way over to there, and you're out of rooks. You have one less rook. Now you've got the open file, you can begin to find ways to get rid of that bishop. The king is moved, of course, and begin operations on the 7th rank. Not a bad idea. But look at the board. We have a potential to put the king in check. He's way over here in the corner. We put him in check here. Let's say you simply move down and put him in check. He can't run to that square, can he? Because of the bishop. He's only got one square he can go to. He doesn't have any pieces that can put themselves in front of the check, right? So when we explore this board, what if we can find a way? We know this square is going to be covered. We know he's going to be put in check once we move that rook. Is there a way we can discover to also cover this square so that he has nowhere to run and we can checkmate this king? As a matter of fact, in a position like this, and many times this type of a position comes into play, we do have a potential checkmate. By exploring the board and examining the board, we can find that checkmate, right? So that's what we want to do. We've looked at the options here. We need to cover this square. What move can cover this square here? There's only one move that I can see. And I already know the solution, so I know this is going to work. That's the fun of me making the videos, right? What would be wrong, instead of coming up here, which is a power move, you get rid of, you move the king and you get rid of a couple of rooks. But what if you went this direction and took that pawn? You can ignore the fact that you're going to be taken, because you're not going to be taken. You've put him in discovered check. The king has to move. So, by coming this direction, you cover that square. It's checkmate. He can't go there. He can't go there. These kind of puzzles are possible to solve in a chess game when we learn to examine the board, see its imbalances, see where the weaknesses go, and explore the areas around the king. When you notice that he's in a corner, pay serious attention. There's only very few flight squares a king can go to, right? This one is covered by his pawn, so that's out. This one will be covered by his bishop, as will this one. That automatically tells you, is there a way to cover this square, and if I can win this game. As opposed to a king being here, if the king was there, it wouldn't be a checkmate. Even if the king was here, it wouldn't be a checkmate. He's up in the corner, though. This way, you can take that pawn with immunity at this point because the king is in check, and you do have this covered square, but he's not in the corner, so he has other squares he can go to. If he wants, he can drop down to here, or if he wants, he can come up over to here, and now he can begin to seek shelter. He has more flight squares to go to, as opposed to being way in a corner. When you get your king way in a corner, your opponent's king, pay close attention, because there's very few places he can run, as opposed to being out in a place where he has lots of squares to go. Just another hint, another Chessercise on the importance of paying attention to the details of the board and where your opponent's king is, as opposed to yours also, right? So those are 3 ideas that I wanted to share with you. Kind of fun little puzzles, doing something a little bit different than analyzing games. I've been finding some fantastic Grandmaster games I'm itching to go through with you. And I'm also going to begin doing some tactics. In a way, this is kind of tactics. It's more of a checkmate puzzle, and they're valuable to get you to look closely at the chessboard. The reason why, in a book, of course, you have white to move and mate in 1, right? So you know you're automatically very carefully looking at all the options. In a real game, you can't see that. You have no idea in a real game that there's a checkmate in 1, do you? Nobody's going to come along and tell you that. So, this is why I emphasize you have to translate this chessboard. You have to find its language, and you have to decipher it so that you can see all your options. One very powerful clue for you is whenever you see your opponent's king stuck in a corner, you know he's only got 3 flight squares. If that pawn was there, he would only have 3 flight squares. It's much easier to checkmate a king in a corner than if the king is in the middle somewhere. You see, even with his pawns surrounding him, in this spot he has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 possible squares he could go to. More than double and 2 of the squares are covered by his own pieces. It's much more difficult to checkmate that king there than it is there. Does that make sense? Okay, thanks for watching my Backyard Professor Chess videos. It's getting windy. I'm going to go home and make some more chess videos in my downstairs studio. So, happy chessercising, happy checkmating, happy reading the board and learning how to read the language of chess. And, as usual, I will see you in the next chess video.